Fourth of July. Everything about the day was red, white, and blue. The sky was blue. The clouds were puffy and white, and my face was red, not from the sunburn, but from the humiliation. My wife, Deanlin, had reminded me, Max, remember the lake level is low. The depth finder had reminded me, 30 feet, 20 feet, 15, 10, 5. Even the caution buoys had warned me. But did I listen to my wife? Did I pay attention to the depth finder? Did I regard the caution buoys? Who had time for such trivialities? It was a holiday. And my 3 daughters and their friends were counting on Captain Max for a day of fun on the boat on the lake. So off we went. Zoom! I was wearing a big hat and sunglasses. About 5 minutes later, boom! We crashed into the sandbar. Now, a lesser man might have told everybody to climb out of the boat and let's just push it back into deeper water. Not me. I was sovereign of the seas. I was captain of the outboard. And so I would debank this boat the manly way, and I pressed the throttle again. We didn't budge. The engine stalled. Deanlin looked at me and she said, Max, I think you messed up. Well, we raised the rudder and looked at it. It was bent like a dog's ear. It wasn't going to take us anywhere. So this time we did push the boat back out into deep water, and I started up the motor, and well, we could go about 5 miles an hour maximum. And as we chugged our way to take the boat to be repaired, all the vacationers looking at us and all the teenagers in the boat staring and glaring at me, I asked myself, Max, now, what were you thinking? You see, that's the problem. I wasn't thinking. Dumb became dumber because I treated a mistake with an even worse choice. Now, that's forgivable on a lake, but in life, that's another matter. You're going to get through this. Not saying it's going to be painless, and I'm not saying it's going to be quick. But God has a way of taking messes and turning them into something really, really positive. In the meantime, it is important that we keep our wits about ourselves, that we not do foolish things or make bad decisions. You know, stupid won't fix stupid. And Joseph teaches us this principle as well. We're going to see how he models such good behavior in just a minute. But before we do, let's take a moment now and fill our lungs with air and our hearts with hope. And let's declare the survivor's creed, shall we? I'll get through this. It won't be painless. It won't be quick. But God will use this mess for good. In the meantime, don't be foolish or naive. But don't despair either. With God's help, I will get through this. Yes, you will. You will. Now, Joseph hit a sandbar of temptation. He was in his 20s when he was a slave in the household of a very important Egyptian official by the name of Potiphar. You know, his brothers likely assumed that their brother, when they sold him into slavery, was doomed to a short life. You know, slaves, well, they just simply didn't survive very long. But Joseph was the exception. When he entered Potiphar's house, he moved up the ladder like a fireman after a cat. He just got one promotion after another. He must have been a bright young fellow, because pretty soon he not only had a secure place in Potiphar's house, he had clout. He was running Potiphar's household. He was in charge of the household. And that meant that he did the hiring, he did the firing, he did the purchasing, he did the administration. And apparently he made Potiphar a very wealthy man. He was a good manager of Potiphar's house. And so Potiphar, no doubt, promoted him among the inner circle of people there in Egypt. Now, the Bible also tells us that not only was Joseph smart, but he was good looking. Look at this verse in Genesis chapter 39 and verse 6. Now, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. Isn't that a great detail? He turned more heads than a chiropractor. He was just a good-looking guy, and he was well-built. The women noticed him. He had wavy hair. He had a square jaw. He had biceps that bulged whenever he carried the tray of tea to Mrs. Potiphar, which was often because she was always wanting a little more time with Joseph. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me. Will you pardon me while I wipe the fog off my glasses?" What is this story doing in the Bible? Mrs. Potiphar is putting the wink wink on Joseph. "Joey, come here, Joey. I need a little more sugar with my coffee." She was doing everything she could to get his attention. As she brought the dessert to the table, she let her arm brush up against his, by the clothing she wore, by the clothing she didn't wear. She was trying to get his attention. "I'm yours for the taking, Joseph." It's interesting, verse 10 says that she propositioned him, or she came after him day by day. So this wasn't a one-time only invitation. This was a standing offer. "Whenever you want me, Joseph, I'm available." Joseph had plenty of opportunities to accept this invitation. And when you think about it, he had plenty of reasons to accept it. After all, wasn't she married to his master? And wasn't he obligated to do what the master's wife would say? A little clandestine sex would be all right, and it would be clandestine, correct? I mean, no one would know. What happens in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. Besides, a dalliance with Potiphar's wife might be viewed as a good political move. You see, he'd have a friend in the inner circle. He would have a chip in the political poker game. The ends justified the means. And you know what? You stop and think about it. The means wasn't all that unpleasant, right? I mean, powerful Potiphar, he had his pick of women. And no doubt, he married a good-looking lady. And no doubt, Joseph, when he left his coat of many colors back in Canaan, he didn't leave his testosterone back in Canaan, right? You know, he could use a little intimacy, time, and the loving embrace. You see, he's under a lot of pressure. He's got to run the whole household. He had to learn a new language, had to learn how to manage the ways of doing things in a foreign land. He's been under a lot of pressure. He could use a little bit of relief. He could have justified this decision. And let me tell you, so can you. So can you. You've been jilted. You've been turned away. Maybe you haven't been sold into slavery, but maybe a friend sold you out. Maybe you haven't been betrayed by your brothers, but maybe you were betrayed by your boss or or by a friend and you're passing through a tough time. These hours are long and the nights are longer. Mrs. or Mr. Potiphar comes your way and they make you an offer. They slide a hotel key in your direction. Or a coworker offers you some drugs, or you see an opportunity to pay some personal bills with company money. Just one time. No one's going to know. Justifications, rationalizations, boy, they pop up like weeds after a summer rain. I won't get caught. I'm only human. Can we talk for just a second? Egypt can be a cruddy place. And when you get taken down to Egypt, like Joseph was taken down to Egypt, it can be a cruddy place. But you need to know that Egypt, or tough times, Egypt is the petri dish for disastrous decisions. And you're a sitting duck. If you're passing through a tough time, you're a sitting duck for a decision that could plague you for the rest of your life. You're going to get through this, my friend. You're going to get through this. This is God's promise. He gets us through things. He is with you. He will guide you. And He's going to take this challenge that you're facing and He's going to use it to develop your character and to advance His kingdom. You're going to get through this. In the meantime, though, don't be foolish. Don't be naive. Don't do something that you're going to regret for the rest of your life. You see, stupid won't fix stupid. And don't make matters worse in a tough time by making a decision that really makes matters worse. Here's where Joseph is our example. Here's what Joseph did. When the temptation came, he went on high alert. I mean, he went on high alert. Look at verse 8. When Mrs. Potiphar dangled the bait, the verse says simply, he refused. He just refused. He gave her no time, no attention, no chit-chat, no reason for hope. Verse 10, he did not heed to her, to lie with her, or be with her. When her number appeared on his cell phone, he didn't answer. When she sent him a text, he didn't respond. When the email from her computer came on his screen, he didn't even read it. He avoided her. He avoided her. He said, verse 8, Potiphar has committed all that he has to my hand. Isn't this interesting? To lie with her would really be to violate a covenant that he had with his employer or his master. Look at his integrity bubbling to the surface. In a culture like ours that makes a big deal out of consenting adults can do whatever they want, we forget how immorality jeopardizes relationships with people who are not even in the bedroom. But Joseph, the first thought he had was, hey, I'm going to do what my boss would have me to do. I'm going to honor his respect. He has invested time in my life, and I'm not going to dishonor him. He was concerned about his master, Potiphar. He was concerned about what that decision would do to people and how it would impact people who were not even in that circle. Years ago, a man who had a great influence on my life, he gave me this counsel. He said, make a list of all the lives you would impact by your own sexual immorality. He said, just make a list. And I did. And every so often I pull out that list and I read it. My list reads like this: my wife, Dinalyn, my 3 daughters, my son-in-law, my yet-to-be-born grandchildren, every person who has ever read one of my books or heard one of my sermons, my publishing team, our church staff. This list reminds me that one act of carnality is a poor exchange for a lifetime of lost legacy. One act of carnality is a poor exchange for a lifetime of lost legacy. This is serious stuff. Why is this story in the Bible? I think that's a fundamental question you ask every time you read a story in the Bible. Why is this in the Bible? I think this story is in the Bible because God knows when we're passing through tough times, sexual temptation is the toughest temptation to resist. And yet sexual temptation is the one that can just destroy the family. And so He gives us this story, very candid, unvarnished story of sexual temptation, of somebody who could justify an evening of immorality, but if they did, it would ruin his legacy. And because he did not, Joseph is the one to whom God could entrust the leadership of Egypt. We've got to ask, if Joseph had given in here, what would have happened? I wonder if his story would have come to an end. I don't know, but I do know this. He proved this time in this temptation who his master was. You see, he was concerned not only with what Master Potiphar would think, he was also concerned, even more concerned, with what God would think, his master with a capital M. Verse 9, he says, "How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Way to go, Joseph. His first thought is, okay, now what would God want me to do? What would God want me to do? Really, the lesson that we learned from Joseph here is very simple, and that is just do what pleases God. There's a bumper sticker we ought to put on our car, right? There's a tattoo we ought to put on our forearm. Just do what pleases God. Anytime a decision surfaces, anytime a choice comes up, just do what pleases God. Your co-workers want to include a trip to the gentleman's club to the evening agenda? Well, just do what pleases God. Or your date wants you to conclude the evening with drinks at his apartment? How should you reply? Well, just do what pleases God. Your friend hands you a joint of marijuana. Your classmates show you a way to cheat. The internet provides pornography to watch. Always ask yourself this question. Now, what would please God? Here's a great verse from the book of Psalms, chapter 4 and verse 5. Do what is right as a sacrifice to the Lord, and trust the Lord. Just say, I'm going to do what is right as a sacrifice to God. Today, God, I'm going to offer to you a sacrifice of good decisions. I'm going to place this good decision on the altar just because I love you. What a great way to live. You know, you don't fix a struggling marriage with an affair. You don't fix a drug problem with more drugs. You don't solve financial insolvency with more debt. You don't make matters better by doing something worse. You don't fix stupid with stupid. There is a time, in a time of difficulty, in which you just got to say, okay, I'm going to do the next right thing. I'm just going to do the next right thing. It may not be pleasant. It may not make me popular. But this time, I'm just going to do the next right thing. God will get you through this. That's His part, to hang in there with you and to walk you through this. But our part is to do our best to obey Him. Tommy did this. The story of Tommy is a story of a modern-day Joseph in many ways. He was born in 1899 to a Baptist pastor and a church pianist. He was exposed early to music, and he, by the age of 12, was imitating the jazz music of the African American culture in the Deep South. He was born with a gift of music. By the time he was a teenager, he was already traveling to Philadelphia, already traveling to Chicago, already learning jazz music on his own. He was already being recognized as a prodigy, giving opportunities to play in nightclubs and speakeasies all over the country. But he forgot his faith. He abandoned his convictions. He compromised his lifestyle. His music improved, but his soul languished. Fortunately, he had siblings who cared about him, and they reached out to him, and they reminded him of his early commitment to God, and he came back. He did. He had an encounter with Christ that later led him to write, "My inner being was thrilled, and my soul was a deluge of divine rapture. My emotions were aroused. My heart was inspired to become a great singer and worker in the kingdom of the Lord." So, young Tommy, at this point, made a decision to pour his talent and his life into creating music that would honor God. The result was a brand new genre of music. Rhythm and blues met worship and praise. Toe-tapping, soul-lifting music. Tommy took a position at a church in Chicago. At the age of 26, he met the love of his life. He began a publishing company. He worked with some of the greatest singers in history, like Mahalia Jackson and others. By 1932, he was enjoying the blessings of life at full throttle. He had a great young family and a promising career. But then one evening, when he was in St. Louis, he was just about to step up and lead worship at a congregation when somebody stepped up onto the platform and handed him a telegram that said, "Your wife just died." She died in childbirth. He jumped on a train and got to Chicago as soon as he could, but by the time he got there, the baby had died as well. And as often is the case, the crisis created a crisis of faith. And Tommy began to struggle. How could God let this happen? After all I've given up, after all the good decisions I've made, after all the things I've done, how could God let this happen? And he went into a crevice of discouragement and depression. And it was hard. It was hard. A friend of his owned a music school that had a small campus, and he invited Tommy to come over and spend a few days on the campus and just surround himself with music and away from obligations and responsibilities. And Tommy took him up on the offer. One evening, as Tommy was walking through one of the buildings, he saw a room that had a piano in it. And Tommy walked in, and there was something about that time with a piano, nobody in the room, and the sun setting out the window. There was something about that moment that led him to play and to pray. For the first time in a long time, he began to pour his heart out to God. He began to ask God for help. And he began to ask God for strength. And he wrote a song that night. Oh, the lyrics. He began to play, "Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on. Let me stand. I am tired. I am weak. I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home." For the rest of his life, Thomas A. Dorsey, testified that the Lord healed him that night as he sat at the piano. Here he is as a young man. Here he is in later life. He went on to pen more than 3,000 songs and become one of the most influential songwriters of all of history. He could have made another choice, couldn't he? He could have walked away. But he made a difference because he made a decision to come back to God. You're going to pass through tough times. I am too. And my prayer is that during our tough times, we'll do what Joseph did. We'll do what Thomas A. Dorsey did. We'll do what God wants us to do, that we won't be foolish and we won't be naive, but we'll reach out and we'll take God's hand and we'll trust that the one who has led us so far will be the one who will lead us home.